The Coming of Abel Behenna by Bram Stoker. The little Cornish port of Pencastle was bright in the early April, when the sun had seemingly come out to stay after a long and bitter winter. Boldly and blackly the rocks stood out against a background of shaded blue, where the sky, fading into mist, met the far horizon. The sea was of true Cornish hue, sapphire, save where it became deep emerald green in the fathomless depths under the cliffs, where the seal caves opened their grim jaws. On the slopes the grass was parched and brown. The spikes of furze bushes were ashy grey, but the golden yellow of their flowers streamed along the hillside, dipping out in lines as the rock cropped up, and lessening into patches and dots, till finally it died away altogether where the sea wind swept around the jutting cliffs and cut short the vegetation as though with an ever-working aerial shear. The whole hillside, with its body of brown and flashes of yellow, was just like a colossal yellow hammer. The little harbour opened from the sea between towering cliffs and behind a lonely rock, pierced with many caves and blowholes through which the sea in storm time sent its thunderous voice, together with a fountain of drifting spume. Hence it wound westwards in a serpentine course, guarded at its entrance by two little curving piers to left and right. These were roughly built of dark slates, placed endways and held together with great beams browned with iron bands. Thence it flowed up the rocky bed of the stream, whose winter torrents had of old cut out its way amongst the hills. This stream was deep at first, with here and there where it widened patches of broken rock exposed at low water, full of holes where crabs and lobsters were to be found at the ebb of the tide. From amongst the rocks rose steady posts, used for warping in the little coasting vessels which frequented the port. Higher up, the stream still flowed deeply, for the tide ran far inland, but always calmly, for all the force of the wildest storm was broken below. Some quarter-mile inland the stream was deep at high water, but at low tide there were at each side patches of the same broken rock as lower down, through the chinks of which the sweet water of the natural stream tickled and murmured after the tide had ebbed away. Here, too, rose mooring posts for the fishermen's boats. At either side of the river was a row of cottages down almost on the level of high tide. They were pretty cottages, strongly and snugly built, with trim narrow gardens in front, full of old-fashioned plants, flowering currants, coloured primroses, wallflower and stonecrop. Over the fronts of many of them climbed clematis and wisteria. The window-sides and doorposts of all were as white as snow, and the little pathway to each was paved with light-coloured stones. At some of the doors were tiny porches, whilst at others were rustic seats cut from tree trunks or from old barrels. In nearly every case the window ledges were filled with boxes or pots of flowers or foliage plants. Two men lived in cottages exactly opposite each other across the stream. Two men, both young, both good-looking, both prosperous, and who had been companions and rivals from their boyhood. Abel Behenna was dark, with the gypsy darkness which the Phoenician mining wanderers left in their track. Eric Sanson, which the local antiquarian said was a corruption of Sagamanson, was fair, which the ruddy hue which marked the path of the now wild Norseman. These two seemed to have singled out each other from the very beginning to work and strive together, to fight for each other, and to stand back to back in all endeavours. They had now put the coping stone on their temple of unity by falling in love with the same girl. Sarah Trefusis was certainly the prettiest girl in Pencastle, and there was many a young man who would gladly have tried his fortune with her, but that there were two to contend against, and each of these the strongest and most resolute man in the port, except the other. The average young man thought that this was very hard, and on account of it bore no goodwill to either of the three principals, whilst the average young woman who had, lest worse should befall, to put up with the grumbling of her sweetheart, and the sense of being only second best which it implied, did not either, be sure, regard Sarah with friendly eye. Thus it came, in the course of a year or so, for rustic courtship is a slow process, that the two men and woman found themselves thrown much together. They were all satisfied, so it did not matter, and Sarah, who was vain and something frivolous, took care to have her revenge on both men and women in a quiet way. When a young woman in her walking out can only boast one not quite satisfied young man, it is no particular pleasure for her to see her escort cast sheep's eyes at a better-looking girl supported by two devoted swains. At length there came a time which Sarah dreaded, and which she had tried to keep distant. The time when she had to make a choice between the two men. She liked them both, and, indeed, either of them might have satisfied the ideas of even a more exacting girl. But her mind was so constituted that she thought more of what she might lose than of what she might gain, and whenever she thought she had made up her mind, she became instantly assailed with doubts as to the wisdom of her choice. Always the man whom she had presumably lost became endowed afresh with a newer and more bountiful crop of advantages than had ever arisen from the possibility of his acceptance. She promised each man that on her birthday she would give him his answer, and that day, the 11th of April, had now arrived. The promises had been given singly and confidentially, but each was given to a man who was not likely to forget. Early in the morning she found both men hovering round her door. Neither had taken the other into his confidence, and each was simply seeking an early opportunity of getting his answer and advancing his suit if necessary. Damon, as a rule, does not take Pythias with him when making a proposal, and in the heart of each man his own affairs had a claim far above any requirements of friendship. So, throughout the day, they kept seeing each other out. The position was doubtless somewhat embarrassing to Sarah, and though the satisfaction of her vanity that she should be thus adored was very pleasing, yet there were moments when she was annoyed with both men for being so persistent. Her only consolation at such moments was that she saw, through the elaborate smiles of the other girls when in passing they noticed her door thus doubly guarded, the jealousy which filled their hearts. Sarah's mother was a person of commonplace and sordid ideas, and, seeing all along the state of affairs, her one intention, persistently expressed to her daughter in the plainest words, was to so arrange matters that Sarah should get all that was possible out of both men. With this purpose she had cunningly kept herself as far as possible in the background in the matter of her daughter's wooings, and watched in silence. At first Sarah had been indignant with her for her sordid views, but, as usual, her weak nature gave way before persistence, and she had now got to the stage of acceptance. She was not surprised when her mother whispered to her in the little yard behind the house. "Go up the hillside for a while. I want to talk to these two. They're both red hot for you, and now's the time to get things fixed." Sarah began a feeble remonstrance, but her mother cut her short. "I tell you, girl, that my mind is made up. Both these men want you, and only one can have you, but before you choose, it'll be so arranged that you'll have all that both have got. Don't argue, child. Go up the hillside, and when you come back I'll have it fixed. I see your way quite easy." So Sarah went up the hillside through the narrow paths between the golden firs, and Mrs. Trefusis joined the two men in the living room of the little house. She opened the attack with the desperate courage which is in all mothers when they think for their children, howsoever mean the thoughts may be. "You two men, you're both in love with my Sarah." Their bashful silence gave consent to the barefaced proposition. She went on. "Neither of you has much." Again they tacitly acquiesced in the soft impeachment. "I don't know that either of you could keep a wife." Though neither said a word, their looks and bearing expressed distinct dissent. Mrs. Trefusis went on. "But if you'd put what you both have together, you'd make a comfortable home for one of you, and Sarah." She eyed the men keenly, with her cunning eyes half shut, as she spoke. Then, satisfied from her scrutiny that the idea was accepted, she went on quickly as if to prevent argument. "The girl likes you both, and mayhap it's hard for her to choose. Why don't you toss up for her? First, put your money together. You've each got a bit put by, I know. Let the lucky man take the lot and trade with it a bit, and then come home and marry her. Neither of you's afraid, I suppose? And neither of you'll say that you won't do that much for the girl that you both say you love." Abel broke the silence. "It don't seem the square thing to toss for the girl. She wouldn't like it herself, and it doesn't seem respectful like to her," Eric interrupted. He was conscious that his chance was not so good as Abel's in case Sarah should wish to choose between them. "You're afraid of the hazard?" "Not me," said Abel boldly. Mrs. Trefusis, seeing that her idea was beginning to work, followed up the advantage. "It is settled that you put your money together to make a home for her, whether you toss for her or leave it for her to choose?" "Yes," said Eric quickly, and Abel agreed with equal sturdiness. Mrs. Trefusis's little cunning eyes twinkled. She heard Sarah step in the yard and said, "Well, here she comes, and I leave it to her," and she went out. During her brief walk on the hillside, Sarah had been trying to make up her mind. She was feeling almost angry with both men for being the cause of her difficulty, and as she came into the room said shortly, "I want to have a word with you both. Come to the Flagstaff Rock where we can be alone." She took her hat and went out of the house up the winding path to the steep rock crowned with a high flagstaff, where once the wrecker's fire basket used to burn. This was the rock which formed the northern jaw of the little harbour. There was only room on the path for two abreast, and it marked the state of things pretty well when, by a sort of implied arrangement, Sarah went first and the two men followed, walking abreast and keeping step. By this time each man's heart was boiling with jealousy. When they came to the top of the rock, Sarah stood against the flagstaff and the two young men stood opposite her. She had chosen her position with knowledge and intention, for there was no room for anyone to stand beside her. They were all silent for a while. Then Sarah began to laugh and said, "I promised the both of you to give you an answer today. I've been thinking and thinking and thinking till I began to get angry with you both for plaguing me so. And even now I don't seem any nearer than ever I was to making up my mind." Eric said suddenly, "Let us toss for it, lass." Sarah showed no indignation whatever at the proposition. Her mother's eternal suggestion had schooled her to the acceptance of something of the kind, and her weak nature made it easy for her to grasp at any way out of the difficulty. She stood with downcast eyes, idly picking at the sleeve of her dress, seeming to have tacitly acquiesced in the proposal. Both men, instinctively realizing this, pulled each a coin from his pocket, spun it in the air, and dropped his other hand over the palm on which it lay. For a few seconds they remained thus, all silent. Then Abel, who was the more thoughtful of the men, spoke. "Sarah, is this good?" As he spoke he removed the upper hand from the coin and placed the latter back in his pocket. Sarah was nettled. "Good or bad, it's good enough for me. Take it or leave it as you like," she said, to which he quickly replied, "Nay, lass, aught that concerns you is good enough for me. I did but think of you lest you might have some pain or disappointment hereafter. If you love Eric better nor me, in God's name say so, and I think I'm man enough to stand inside. Likewise, if I'm the one, don't make us both miserable for life." Face to face with a difficulty, Sarah's weak nature proclaimed itself. She put her hands before her face and began to cry, saying, "It was my mother. She keeps telling me—" The silence which followed was broken by Eric, who said hotly to Abel, "Let the lass alone, can't you? If she wants to choose this way, let her. It's good enough for me and for you too. She said it now, I must abide by it." Hereupon Sarah turned upon him in sudden fury and cried, "Hold your tongue! What is it to you, at any rate?" And she resumed her crying. Eric was so flabbergasted that he had not a word to say, but stood looking particularly foolish, with his mouth open and his hands held out with the coins still between them. All was silent till Sarah, taking her hands from her face, laughed hysterically and said, "As you two can't make up your minds, I'm going home!" And she turned to go.